don't discuss
you yourself. Last year, I was in the hot seat of Jubilee's Surrounded series. I was one atheist surrounded by 25 Christians, and I had a wonderful time. Recently, Jordan Peterson took a crack at it. He was one Christian surrounded by 25 atheists. At least he was, until Jubilee changed the title of the video, probably because Jordan Peterson kept refusing to clarify whether or not he calls himself a Christian. Since you yourself are a Christian, right?
Yes, people debate about that, and I generally don't discuss it publicly.
Which, fair enough, nobody should be forced to adopt a label that they're uncomfortable with. But then, why would you agree to this project if you are famously unwilling to call yourself the very thing that the episode is based around? The episode was clearly planned as one Christian surrounded by atheists, and although I understand why Peterson doesn't want to box himself into a worldview, it's a little bit unfair to the people who showed up, obviously preparing quite hard beforehand in order to debate on the world stage against a Christian, only to find out that the person they're debating against doesn't call himself a Christian. The episode was actually quite shocking to watch and has been widely regarded as a bit of a disaster. It certainly contains some awkward moments.
You're really quite something, you are.
Aren't I? But you're really quite nothing. Right, you're not a Christian.
As for myself, I've also spent a fair amount of time with Jordan Peterson trying to get to the bottom of what his religious views are.
Did a man have intercourse with Mary and produce Jesus? That's a factual question. It's not a value question.
You must understand what you're being asked here. So I think I'm quite well placed to offer a commentary on what I think went wrong when Jordan Peterson paid a visit to Jubilee. We're of course not going to watch the whole thing. I'm going to select some moments, beginning with the moment that I first came across listening to this that made me think to myself, okay, fine, I'll make a bloody response. So in the Bible, it talks a lot about slavery, right?
Yes.
Yes, so in that, it teaches you how to take care of a slave. Rather than saying slavery is wrong, I think
No,
it
it
should
says
say
that in the story of Moses.
It says slavery is incorrect. It says
Well,
it's
that's
immoral.
why Moses leads his people away from slavery.
So this seems completely confused to me. It is, of course, true that the Hebrew Bible not only mentions or describes slavery, but proactively condones it, and does indeed give you instructions on exactly how to own and sell other human beings as private property. But Peterson makes an interesting observation. In the story of Exodus, the Israelites are enslaved in Egypt, and God frees them from slavery, which Peterson interprets as God telling us that slavery is wrong. Otherwise, why would he have liberated the Israelites from slavery? But there's a big problem with this. Of course,
that
God
was because
liberated the
they were
Israelites from
chosen,
slavery,
but
because the
others
Israelites
weren't.
are God's chosen people.
Yes.
God made a covenant with Abraham and promised that his descendants would inherit a land where they would be together and worship God. In Exodus chapter 2, we read that the Israelites groaned in their slavery and cried out to God, and God heard their groaning and remembered the covenant he made with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. The Israelites were God's chosen people. That's why he freed them from Egyptian bondage. But once he did free them, he begins immediately telling them how they can own other people as private property, that is, as slaves. Take, for example, Leviticus chapter 25, which comes after the Exodus. We read, "Your male and female slaves are to come from the nations around you. From them you may buy slaves." That is, the nations that are outside of Israel. So, not talking about Israelite slaves, but other nations. You may also buy some of the temporary residents living among you and members of their clans born in your country, and they will become your property. Sounds a lot like slavery to me. You can bequeath them to your children as inherited property and can make them slaves for life. But you must not rule over your fellow Israelites ruthlessly. So why can you buy male and female slaves from the nations around you, make them your property for life, bequeath them to your children as inheritable property, but not rule over your fellow Israelites ruthlessly? The difference is that the Israelites are God's chosen people, so they get a different set of rules. This is a crucial and I think obvious distinction in the Hebrew Bible, which completely undercuts what Peterson is saying here. But as an Israelite, you can actually have a Hebrew slave. You just have to treat them differently to the slaves from the nations around you. Take a look at Exodus 21. That's that same Exodus which recounts the story of God liberating the Israelites from Egypt. When you buy a male Hebrew slave, he shall serve 6 years, but in the 7th he shall go out a free person without debt. So the kind of slavery that we're talking about here for Hebrews is more like a kind of indentured servitude. You only keep them for a set amount of time, after which they get to go free. Unless, of course, it's a girl. If a man sells his daughter into slavery, she doesn't go free like the male slaves do. She's a slave for life. Oh, and I'm reading here from the updated NRSV translation. The NIV translates the Hebrew word ebed as servant here rather than slave.
Yeah,
But
right.
take a look at Deuteronomy chapter 5, where that same word, ebed, is used. Remember that you were slaves, ebed, in Egypt. So whatever kind of slavery or servitude we're talking about here in Exodus, it's the same word the Bible uses to describe the Israelites under Egyptian bondage. Oh, and for that male servant who gets to go free after 6 years, if the master gives him a wife and he has children, then when he goes free, the wife and the children stay with the master. But if the man decides that he loves his wife and his children and his master and decides to stay with them, what do you think happens? Do you think they all get to go free together? No. You take the male to the doorpost, you pierce his ear like cattle, and he becomes your servant for life. Later in that same chapter, we read, anyone who beats their male or female slave with a rod must be punished if the slave dies as a direct result, but they are not to be punished if the slave recovers after a day or two, since the slave is their property. Remember, this is from the book of Exodus, the book which Jordan Peterson thinks tells us that slavery is definitely wrong and immoral. Later, in Deuteronomy chapter 20, God is preparing the Israelites to march into the Promised Land, and specifically tells them the difference in how they should treat those outside the Promised Land versus those who currently reside within it. When you march up to attack a city, make its people an offer of peace. That sounds pretty decent. If they accept and open their gates, all the people in it shall be subject to forced labor and shall work for you. Some peace. If they refuse to make peace and they engage you in battle, lay siege to that city. When the Lord your God delivers it into your hand, put to the sword all the men in it. As for the women, the children, the livestock, and everything else in the city, you may take these as plunder for yourselves, and you may use the plunder the Lord your God gives you from your enemies. So the women, the children, and the livestock are taken as plunder. Now it actually says that this is how you treat all of the cities that are at a distance from you and do not belong to the nations nearby. But what about those nations that inhabit the land that God has promised to the Israelites? However, in the cities of the nations the Lord your God is giving you as an inheritance, do not leave alive anything that breathes. Completely destroy them. And then it lists a bunch of nations which are to be completely destroyed. So these nations get to escape becoming slaves of the Israelites by being killed. I could go on and on about this, but suffice to say, the idea that the Bible tells us slavery is wrong because it narrates God freeing his chosen people from foreign bondage before going on to give precise instructions about how to own other human beings as private property, particularly those who are foreign and therefore not part of God's chosen people, is at best a gross misreading of the text.
It says slavery is incorrect. It says
Well,
it's
that's
immoral.
why Moses leads his people away from slavery.
But why does the Bible predicate and tell people exactly how to take care of a slave? Isn't
Well,
that immoral? Wouldn't you say that culturally we've evolved as a species, as he said earlier about empathy?
Yeah, I would say that the reason we evolved, so to speak, away from slavery was because the West was founded on Judeo-Christian morality and the presumption that every person was made in the image of God.
Wouldn't you
So
say
slavery itself became immoral, and
Yeah.
that was established by Protestant Christians in the
Yes.
UK, who then convinced
Yes.
the UK government for 200 years to go to war with
And wouldn't you
slavery.
say that this is about the cultural evolution of humans in general rather than just
You know, I think
Christianity?
it's the flowering of the ideas that were embedded in the biblical texts across long spans of time.
Okay, so this is an interesting debate, especially the long spans of time bit. I mean, if the Bible really were as anti-slavery as Peterson is making it out to be, isn't it a bit strange that it took literally thousands of years for society to realize that, only finally deciding that slavery was a bad idea around about the same time as the Enlightenment? I mean, of course, there is a long and celebrated history of Christian opposition to slavery, but there's also a slightly less celebrated history of Christian justification for slavery. I mean, I like to think of it this way. Imagine you were to go back in time to some kind of plantation in the American South where slaves were working in the field. Suppose you went to the master of the house and you said, this is wrong. Not just the way you're treating them, but just owning them as private property is a fundamentally immoral thing to do. Where is the first place that slave owner could turn, and compellingly so, in order to justify what he's doing. It goes without saying that it would be the Bible, but I'm going to say it anyway just because some people don't seem to realize this. If the Bible really were anti-slavery, I would probably expect it to say so. But at the very least, I would expect it to not proactively give instructions on exactly how and for how long and in what manner you can own other human beings as private property and bequeath them to your children as inheritable property. It's no wonder that it took thousands of years of the Bible's existence for people to start thinking that slavery might be wrong, because it's not exactly the most obvious conclusion that you can draw. We're sometimes told that the New Testament changes things a bit, but for one thing, the New Testament constantly reaffirms slavery, such as in Ephesians chapter 6, slaves, obey your earthly masters with respect and fear and with sincerity of heart, just as you would obey Christ. Now there is also the injunction to masters to treat your slaves in the same way. Do not threaten them, it says. So maybe the masters should be good to their slaves at the very least. But what if the master isn't good to the slave? Well, in 1 Peter we read, "Slaves, in reverent fear of God, submit yourselves to your masters, not only to those who are good and considerate, but also to those who are harsh."
There
The
you
author
go.
makes a comparison to Christ taking on suffering for the sake of righteousness, and essentially says that slaves should do the same thing. Now, some people like to point to Galatians chapter 3, where Paul says, "There is neither Jew nor Gentile, neither slave nor free, for you are all one in Christ Jesus." This is surely Paul saying that slavery is a bad thing. But they tend to forget Paul also says, "Nor is there male and female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus." Is Paul some kind of radical gender abolitionist? No. He's just saying that whether you're male or female is not relevant to your salvation in Christ. He still thinks that males and females exist and should exist on earth. And so if we're going to be consistent here, we have to think he's speaking in the same way about slavery. If we want to interpret this as Paul saying there should be no slave or free, then we have to also interpret him as saying there should be no male or female, which, funnily enough, is an interpretation I find Christians tend to resist. But anyway, even if the Bible is in some way anti-slavery, at the very, very least, it is incredibly unclear about it. And the fact remains that if you showed this text to somebody who'd never heard of it before, you just can't come away from reading this entire
Yes.
library that is the Bible, thinking that it provides a good foundation for saying that slavery is wrong.
I feel like this is just humans editing based on the cultural evolution
And what do you mean
of
by
around
just?
just.
Yeah, just humans.
Well,
What do you mean
humans.
editing?
Well, based on culture and history, right? We get better.
Well, they
at-
did do it based on culture and history, but
Yes.
culture and history have their foundations too. So
Well, yeah, but we're talking about slavery. So many people bolstered it
Why are you
based
so
on
defensive?
based on the
that's-
Bible. They
that's
looked at it
much
and they
less true.
justified it
That's
in the
like
United States,
a
not the South. They justified
poster
it.
child of
Protestant
being ideologically captured.
thought in particular was stringently
Yes.
against slavery,
Which-
and it was about the only
Stringently
movement in the
against.
history
Yes.
of the human race that
Yes.
had an anti-slavery
Which
direction.
which was driven by humans and their
That's
understanding
one
of
way of
morality.
looking. Well, it depends.
It's the same with women's suffrage. I mean, women's in the
What do you mean
patriarchy.
it was driven by humans? Humans drove slavery too.
Yes, exactly. They
Well, so
weaved-
there's no argument there. If slavery and anti-slavery were both driven by humans, what
Yes.
does your claim that they were driven by humans have to do with it?
Well, the point is that neither are driven by the Bible. It's not like slavery exists because of the Bible, but abolitionism doesn't exist because of the Bible either.
Exactly.
The point that this chap is making, I think, is that slavery exists because humans invented it, and eventually humans thought that it was wrong. And the Bible kind of had nothing to do with that. Now, I'm not saying that's the correct view, by the way. I think the Bible might have been a really important text in the abolitionist movement, but I think that's what he's trying to say.
There is a
morality
specific-
based on the culture that within the society that they live in.
Okay,
So
fine.
with
I think
women's
that
suffrage
can
as
happen.
well, it's a very similar topic in the Bible. There are denominations in Christianity, such as Pentecostal movement, which do bolster women to be pastors, right? Which I think that's a great thing to do. But most like to disregard
Where do you
women.
think the idea that human beings were sufficiently equal to all vote and not be slaves came from?
If Peterson is insinuating that the answer is the Bible, I would love to know how he interprets the texts I just read out.
Where
Regard
do you
women.
think the idea that human beings were sufficiently equal to all vote and not be slaves came from?
Humans?
Yeah, but so did the idea of slavery.
So did the
that's
idea of God.
Fine, but what's
Yes.
your point? Like, you're not making an argument. You're just saying all thoughts come from humans,
Yes.
regardless of the thoughts.
It's not driven by a higher power. It's driven on our experiences
Define
as
higher.
humans, which is
Oh my
what is
God.
best for all people.
Is it driven by conscience?
It could be. Which conscious is also something that has evolved over time, and I think that's
What's
something
the
that does evolve with morality and empathy.
Okay, I don't understand the point that you're making.
My point is that God influenced slavery. People looked at the Bible and went, this is moral because God says so, just like women's suffrage
There's lots
and
of
just like homosexuality.
all human societies were slave owned, so
Yes.
you can't blame that on the Bible.
if humanity decided
Oh wait, address that first.
What, about
All
slavery?
human societies were slavers, so you can't blame that on the Bible.
Wait, so what? Who's saying that the Bible is to be blamed for the existence of slavery? Nobody says that. Of course, all societies own slaves, so you can't blame the Bible for slavery. But if the Bible is supposed to be God's moral guidance to humans on Earth, then you can blame it for failing to mention that slavery is wrong. I mean, more or less all other societies were also polytheistic, but the Bible had no problem coming down and saying, I know you're all polytheistic, but I think that's wrong and you should change your ways. So when Peterson says all societies own slaves, so you can't blame that on the Bible, it's a straw man. Who thinks that the existence of slavery can be blamed on the Bible? As in, that's like where it came from. Anyway, then the conversation is timed out.
There, you've been voted up by the majority.
So, moving on to the next conversation and a broader discussion on Peterson's definitions of morality and God.
If you're saying that morality and purpose cannot come from science, is the opposite of that true, that morality and purpose can only come from God?
That's a way of defining it, yes.
Okay.
That's right, that's good. So I would say that with
Okay.
regard to the first claim, say, atheists don't understand what they're rejecting. Because I
Mhm.
would say, by definition, God is the unity upon which moral claims are based. That's a
Okay.
definition.
So this is really important, and it might be helpful in understanding Jordan Peterson's religious views. I made a whole video a while back deconstructing what I think Jordan Peterson's views on God are, but I'll try to summarize here. Peterson tends to point out that in order to do anything, you need some kind of value or preference. If I want to pick up this mug and have a sip of coffee, I need to prefer the state of affairs in which I've drunk a sip of coffee than the state of affairs in which I haven't. That preference is a value, and without that value, I just wouldn't pick up the mug and start drinking from it. But with any value, we can keep digging for more fundamental values. Why did you show up to work? Well, because you value not getting fired. Why don't you want to get fired? Well, because you want to make money. Why do you want to make money? To provide for your family. Why do you want to provide for your family? Well, because you love your family. Okay, why do you love your family? You can keep pushing this on, and it seems like it will go on forever unless you reach some kind of foundational value. For Jordan Peterson, that foundational value is God. And he doesn't mean that, well, I think that that foundational value is probably God, although, it could be a bunch of things. I think it's God. No, for Jordan Peterson, it's a matter of definition. He just defines that foundational value as God. That's why he says,
By definition, God is the unity upon which moral claims are based. That's the definition.
so this can lead to some confusion, because the atheist might ask, well, do you need God for morality? And Peterson says, God is kind of the definition of the basis of morality, so I don't even really understand your question. Unfortunately, I don't think he's always very good at explaining this, which, as I said, can lead to some confusion. And I think a lot of the talking past each other is coming from the fact that they're just talking about two different things when they use the word God. For a lot of Christians, and seemingly for most of the atheists here, God is the traditional tri-omni being. Omnipowerful, omnibenevolent, omniscient.
Omniscient, omnipotent, agentic, supernatural being, some sort of God that is all powerful, all perfect,
Omnipotent, all-loving God.
just like maximally great in all
I
of the
think
great
that's a
making
definition,
qualities.
sure.
The all-knowing, all-powerful, all-good, perfect notion of God.
But for Peterson, God is just the basis of the value hierarchy, which is quite a different kind of being.
So
Yeah,
I
and that
agree on
that
a lot.
exists.
I mean, when it comes to talking about how
But
men
the
should be
sup-
masculine and things of that nature,
That could
you and I are
exist,
100%
which is not
in
God.
agreement.
So-
We just don't agree on the justification that God is the only thing that.
That's
provides
actually, I
morality.
think, what he's doing is to reframe the idea of
Notice
God.
again, Peterson says, look, God is not the just.
He's just having another definition and putting the label of God on it. So then that would be the God that he hypothetically thinks exists. Well, anyway.
Well, you and I agree on a lot. I mean, when it comes to talking about how men should be masculine and things of that nature, you and I are 100% in agreement. We just don't agree on the justification that God is the only thing that provides
It's
morality.
not a justification, it's a definition.
What's the difference then?
Notice again, Peterson says, look, God is not the justification for morality. He's not making the typical Christian claim that morality is this thing that exists that can only be justified if God exists. He's making just a simple definitional claim, and I have to say, a quite strange one. And look, people are free to define their terms however they like, but this does make the claim that morality has to come from God.
I mean, by the way, to be fair, the definition of the concept of God itself has been changing and evolving forever. So if with our modern conception with neuroscience and psychology, which he is, something like a pinnacle of a value hierarchy would fit the description, except instead of, let's say, the one that make the rain, or the God that, I don't know, supposed to answer your prayers and give you a kid, or let's say typical Christian morality, the God that is the reason for morality itself. Well, I guess it's not a biggest fucking crime to redefine some concept and adjust to the time, but yeah, but it's just like, why don't we just get rid of this fucking concept of God altogether and just call it the moral hierarchy and pinnacle of that? I don't know, you can call it Jack or John or like whatever. I think that's the thing that basically creates the debate. He's redefining a concept and putting the old label of God, which people associate with a different concept, on it, and that would create a debate that should not necessarily exist. Let's see.
Trivially true one. It kind of has no content because you've just defined morality with reference to God. Of course morality has to come from God then.
Is there a
And
hierarchical
that is what the
structure?
quantum.
Is there a hierarchical structure? Are some things more important than others?
So you can see here, Peterson is trying to draw out this value hierarchy that we were talking about a moment ago. And just before they get cut off,
Or some things, I think that some things lead to more benefits than
Then,
others.
by your own definition, some things are more important than others.
Yes.
Okay. What is
what is, and then they get cut off. I think Peterson was probably about to ask something like, what is at the top of that value hierarchy, or what is the most important thing in that value hierarchy? He would then probably just stipulate as a definition that that's God. Next, we get this extraordinary clip, which is one of the most viral from the whole episode.
how you doing?
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
I guess since you said morality and purpose cannot be found in science, it would just depend on like what you're referencing. If you're saying a description of your psychological preferences would be considered within science, sure, but I don't think that you have to say that it comes from science in order to be like an atheist. As an agnostic atheist, I don't know if God exists and I don't believe that God exists. And the only ones that I would really reject would be like the all-knowing, all-powerful, all-good, perfect notion of God that plenty of Christians just like prescribe themselves. So I guess
How is that relevant to this claim?
you're basing a position of morality and purpose in some like notion of God that isn't the same type of notion of God that typical Christians would prescribe. Your notion of God is
What typical Christians?
yeah, typically when I talk to Christians, they say that they believe in
How
all-knowing.
about Cardinal Newman, who defined God as conscience? He's a major influence on all of Catholic social theory. How about that, Christian?
So Peterson is trying to point out that not everybody defines God in this analytically philosophical manner of all-powerful and all-loving and all-knowing. Instead, it could be something like conscience, or it could be something mysterious that we can't comprehend. But it is perfectly legitimate to ask, okay then, Dr. Peterson, what do you mean? Are you talking about this kind of God? But Peterson really wants to know, what do we mean by believe?
Sure. So do you believe in the all-knowing, all-powerful, all-good notion of God?
What do you mean by believe?
There you go.
Do you think it to be true?
That's the circular definition. What do you mean
How's
when
it
you say
circular?
you believe?
How's that circular?
Because you added no content to the answer by substituting the word true and believe.
Okay, pause. I really don't think this is
no.
a circular definition.
No, it's not.
Except I suppose insofar as all definitions are kind of circular to some
Yeah.
degree. I mean, yeah, every single word in the dictionary ultimately has to be defined with reference to some other word in the dictionary. So there's some ultimate circularity to definitions. Ultimately, a definition is just putting the same thing in different words. And in defining belief, this guy, Parker, I think his name is, has added the concept of thinking, you have to think it as well as truth. You think it to be true. I think that does add new information to this word belief, even if that definition is incomplete or is a definition that Jordan Peterson disagrees with. To say that it's circular, I think, is pretty strange.
I said you think it to be true.
All right. So if you believe something, you stake your life on it.
What do you mean by that?
You live for it, and you die for it. That's what I mean by that.
Okay, so this sounds a bit dramatic, and without context, also extremely strange. And you can see from the facial expression of one of the people reacting that, yeah, this is an odd thing to say. But you know what? And this might surprise you, I kind of actually agree with Jordan Peterson here, and I think I understand the point he's trying to make. I'm not sure, but I'll try to clarify it. Peterson always likes to point out that people often say they believe things, but when it comes to looking at their actions, they don't act in accordance with the things they say that they believe, which means they probably don't really believe those things. For example, if I said to you that I believe totally that it's not going to rain today,
Which is my argument for saying that even religious people today do not believe in God, even though they might say so. Because none of their behaviors is according to that hypothetical conception or belief.
but then you saw me pick up an umbrella on my way out of the door,
Yeah.
what would you think? You'd probably think that I was either just lying to you, or that maybe I thought I kind of believed it, but in my heart of hearts, I don't really. So what you really believe is not just what you say you believe, or even maybe what you think you believe, but what you act out. What do your actual behaviors point to?
It isn't something that you say. It isn't something that's associated with logical consistency. It's not declarative. It's not propositional. It's not a figment of your imagination. It's the presupposition of your attention and your action.
But why does Peterson say that you stake your life on it?
If you believe something, you stake your life on it.
What do you mean by that?
You live for it, and you die for it.
Like as a point of definition almost, why does he think that to believe something, you have to be willing to die for it? That question prompts this extraordinary exchange.
Okay, so you're saying that you don't believe something if you wouldn't die for it?
Not really, no.
Okay. So
How would you define belief? Something you say?
Okay, so I explain, like, I could believe it is the case that this pen exists, but if someone like threatened my life, right, I would lie in order to be able to save my life, right? Like I think you would do that too. You wouldn't lie to save your
Don't be
life.
so sure.
You wouldn't lie to save your life.
How much do you know about me? I didn't lie to save my career.
But
Lie to
he's
save my
asking.
clinical practice.
He didn't
Lie,
assume.
lie to like save your children, your mom, your dad.
I don't think lying would save them.
Okay, pause. So the idea is that in order to believe something, like the idea that this chair exists, you have to be willing to die for it. And this guy says, well, yeah, I believe that this chair exists, but if my life depended on it, I would happily just lie about it and say that I don't believe that. But I think one thing people are missing from this exchange is that in order to lie about something, you have to believe it. If somebody threatened my friend with a gun and said, Alex, you have to say that this chair does not exist or I'll shoot your friend, then yeah, I'll probably lie. I'll say, yeah, okay, the chair doesn't exist. But that doesn't mean I don't believe the chair exists. I still believe it exists. I would just be willing to lie about it. So if my life depended on me saying that the chair didn't exist, I would happily say it. But suppose my life depended on me believing that the chair didn't exist. Could I do it? For example, suppose I'm in some kind of aeroplane and I want to sit down on a chair. If that chair exists, then I'll sit down on the chair. But if the chair doesn't actually exist, I'll
Okay.
fall through the ground and I'll end up dying. In that circumstance, regardless of what I say, regardless of whether I'm willing to lie about it, whether or not I actually sit on the chair will have to depend on my actual belief. Does the chair exist or does it not? Like if I'm in that aeroplane and I say, yeah, I believe the chair exists, but I don't actually believe it, I'm not going to sit down on that chair. If I don't believe it's really there and it might kill me to sit down, I'm not going to sit down. So to truly believe something means that if for some reason your life actually depended on that belief, you would act in accordance with that belief. In other words, you'd be staking your life not on saying that you believe it, but on actually believing it. So they talk about the existence of a pen, and this guy says, I believe the pen exists, but if my life depended on it, I would just lie. Okay, but would you stop believing that the pen existed, even if you lied about it? Would you actually stop believing that the pen is there just because somebody was threatening your life? That's not something you could do. Even if your life depended on it, you can't just change your beliefs like that. So the
Yeah.
question is not, when your life depends on it, would you lie? The question is, when your life depends on it, which belief do you actually act out? And whichever one you act out in that circumstance is probably the one you really believe. I think that's kind of what Peterson is getting at here. But to be clear, I don't know. I could be way off the mark here in terms of what Peterson
But it's
actually
a good
meant to
point
say. I suppose
regardless.
I'm just trying to steel man Peterson here by putting this statement into what I think is probably its most plausible form. And I've actually thought about this exact thing before. In fact, we kind of had the same discussion when I spoke to him on his podcast. When people are looking for essentially definitions,
Yeah.
and just a second ago you said, well, what is it to believe? And you said, well, what you believe is what you're willing to die for.
Yeah,
I'm not willing to die for my belief that this chair exists.
maybe.
Maybe in a broad sense. If not
Hard to
believing,
say.
if not believing that the chair existed required me to sort of give up my trust in my sense data,
Right.
then I might literally die by accident by sort of walking off a cliff because I don't trust my eyes anymore. So there's
Well,
it's
it's
that
also not-
sense. So I actually had the exact same initial response as this guy in the Jubilee video. I said, well, I believe that this chair exists, but I'm not willing to die for that belief. And then I immediately realized, wait, hold on. Yeah, I kind of am actually. Like, I'm not willing to always tell the truth about that belief, even if it means my life is at risk. But when it comes to how I actually act, if my life depended on the existence or non-existence of this chair, I just do believe that it exists, and so I would act as if it does exist. So in that sense, what I truly believe is something which, at least in some circumstances, I would be willing to die for. Even if you lie all the time when anybody asks you about your beliefs, to lie about that belief still requires that you actually believe it. But then the conversation shifts onto the concept of lying and the question of whether you would lie to save your life.
I would lie in order to be able to save my life, right? Like, I think you would do that too. You wouldn't lie to save your
Don't be
life?
so sure.
You wouldn't lie to save your life?
How much do you know about me? I didn't lie to save my career. I didn't lie to save my clinical practice.
Would you lie to, like, save your children, your mom, your dad?
I don't think lying would save them.
Can there ever be a circumstance logically that lying could save someone?
Yeah, and if you're steeped in sin, you're likely to live in circumstances like that.
Clearly, this guy is just trying to ask, like, is there some circumstance, Dr. Peterson, in which you would be willing to lie? Like,
Okay, I guess the painting is done. Yeah. Yeah. I don't see anything else that I want to develop in the whole composition. Yeah. Okay, good. Yeah, I think I'm done. I think it has a clear light and dark. Things are developed along the lines of a focal point. And I don't see any details that needs to be erased or added. So I declare this solved. That's a better term for it. Rather than the painting is finished, it's solved. The visual challenge in front of me. So this is a solved painting. In other words, it's done. Okay. I'm gonna start a new painting in a second.